Good morning. Last week I sat down and chatted to Matías Ventura. Not only does he have the best name in the whole of WordPress, but he is also the technical lead for Gutenberg. So if you want to find out what's coming up in WordPress over the next couple of years, check this video out. We discuss responsiveness and what might be coming to Gutenberg soon. We also discuss the role of page builders. We discuss third-party block libraries. We discuss how development decisions are actually made in Gutenberg. We also discuss block themes. And we also discuss what he feels about getting negative reviews on Gutenberg. There are chapter markers in the video below. Let's get into it. What's your background? How did you get into this to start with?
Sure. My background is actually a bit interesting because I was doing filmmaking. I started filmmaking. I was directing short films and stuff at a film school.
Wow.
And I also studied philosophy. That was sort of my two areas was art and philosophy, the areas that I wanted to really explore. And I was sort of like on the side doing, I guess, WordPress. Well, I started with Flash. I was doing, because of the filmmaking and stuff, I was doing some animation, and that led me to like creating some websites using Flash at first. And then I guess around 2003, I ran across WordPress, and the web standards movement was started to happen. And I got like very interested in that. So I started building themes, mostly custom themes and in this case, for the film school, for some of the films we were making and so forth.
Okay.
Also got involved with BB Press too.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
So I was creating some themes for BB Press and so forth. And that led me into, I guess, web design, web engineering. And it's been going on since then.
And then how did you move from there into Automatic and working with Matt? How did that happen?
I think our first contact was actually around BB Press because I contributed like a design or like a HTML mockup for the features page of BB Press. That's how we first got in contact. But later on, I applied to work on themes at Automatic. So I joined Automatic and was working on themes initially. And then once within Automatic, I moved around a lot. I always had this thing that I never sort of separated design and development. So whenever I was going too deep into one area, I felt like, oh, it's time to pull back and like explore the other one for a bit more. So I've been bouncing across disciplines for a while. At Automatic, I started working on, at the time, it was sort of like this surge on like JavaScript as a medium, sort of to explore interactivity and so forth. So I started working on the Calypso project at Automatic. I was on the initial team that sort of designed and architected Calypso. That was for like about a year and a half or maybe 2 years. And then I moved to the developer experience team at Automatic, which is sort of cross-cutting across business units and functions. It does engineering, hiring, and so forth. And that was around the time where I started working on Gutenberg, leading Gutenberg on the.
So were you around when Gutenberg was first being thought about and discussed and created, and you were in the room during those conversations?
Yep. Yeah,
Take me
that
back.
was the.
Take me back there. What was the what was the
Well,
initial spark?
yeah, so it actually had like a few layers because the very original like seed for Gutenberg, it started I think around either WordPress 3.6 or 3.8. Like one of the versions where we tried to do like a UI for post formats.
Okay, yeah.
And that sort of like didn't work out super well. And there's like and it was pulled back from, again, I think from a beta version. It was like, okay, this idea is not working. We pull it back. And there was like a realization at the end of it, which was maybe we have approached this wrong. It's not about like choosing what format your post is about, and it's more about this idea of like content blocks. that was sort of like the summary. I think like Matt made it on like and it was left there, sort of like to explore at a later date.
Yeah.
So when this was coming back up, I mentioned to, let me reconstruct. I think I sent Matt a message about like, I have an idea for how we could do content blocks in a way that remains backwards and forwards compatible. And it was like the HTML comments
Yeah.
idea.
Okay, so that was your idea, was it HTML
Yeah,
comment?
yeah.
Okay.
I'm to blame for that.
There was a lot of
um,
discussion about that though at the time, wasn't there? I remember that.
Yeah, it was very interesting actually because we also had, I think there were a few other attempts to do like content block editors. At least it was one internal yet automatic with a team, the Cloud App team, which was an acquisition back then, I think 2012, 2013 or so.
Well, okay.
Um, and well, that team was led by Guillermo Rauch, who's now the CEO of Vercel. And they did like an initial sort of block editor stuff. And one of the issues was it wasn't compatible with existing WordPress content. And it wasn't like two ways compatible because one of the obvious things is that this was going to take some time. So you needed to be able to sort of install whatever plugin or so to like test this stuff. And if you said like, oh, this is not quite ready, I disable it, your content is still there, both the
Yeah.
one that you created with Gutenberg and the one that was there before. Um,
Yeah.
so the HTML comment, to be fair, it wasn't like entirely new because WordPress already had used this for the more tag and being able to break a page into multiple pages.
Yeah.
Those were also we were using HTML comments already, um, and I find it. My impression is it worked out really well. It's been one of the most stable parts, and it allowed us to really roll it out incrementally. And you were able to like edit a Gutenberg post in whatever other third-party editor, and you would still have access to your content. I think there's also like to me, there was a philosophical aspect to it as well, which is a lot of the information we need to reconstruct blocks is not necessarily semantic information. It's
Mm.
not necessarily information that we want to consider as being like user content directly. So those things, the format of HTML comments really strongly implies this is information machines can reconstruct, but it doesn't permeate to the semantics of the document. So even if you're in a situation where the only artifact you have of your website is like a database dump that you download somewhere, and you extract the content of the post, there's still like semantics there, and the comments are just, and even if you run that in a browser, those wouldn't render. You would get like a semantic document.
Yeah.
Has also been useful for contexts where, for whatever reasons, like blocks are not being transformed or created. So like, I don't know, some email context or RSS feeds where like for whatever reason, like nothing was processed. It was also to avoid the issue with shortcodes where you would end up with like text that didn't have any meaning, but visually to the users and so forth. But yeah, I remember it was an interesting discussion on
Yeah, I
what
remember
we
it.
should lean on and so forth. But there's also like again the reality of like how do you bring like some of these changes into a system that has been there for by the time already by like more than 10 years, I think. Like, it was
Have
almost
you,
15 years.
on reflection, have you thought of any better way of doing it now when you look back, or is that the best solution that you can think of still?
Um, I would still do it the same way.
Okay.
Absolutely in the context of WordPress. If it was like a project starting from scratch, I think like sure you can debate other ways of structuring data all the way down to the database and so forth. Um, Even then, I think it's not as straightforward as it may seem on the surface. It was also interesting because the like later on, like when Automatic acquired Tumblr, Tumblr did like a similar around. It was fine because it was almost at the exact same time. It was just like private, they were moving into the same sort of like doing content blogs. And
Yeah.
they did like a very different approach. They introduced a new format purely based on JSON and so forth. And still to this day, they haven't been able to reconcile all their content to this new content format. So the posting like you get like all these situations where it's clunky and so forth. But this is an example of a place where like you have like mostly full control over because again, it's not a project that deploy widely, it's one platform and so forth. Even then, I think the issues of introducing a new format, really tricky, really dangerous if you don't have like a really fluid transition from old to the new that you can deploy widely. The incompatibilities are just like way too many.
Yeah.
So even then, even if WordPress was starting today, I'm not saying like would do like exactly the same thing, but I wouldn't discard the idea because I think there's some inherent value to again the rationale that I was coming from is that we should store things in a way that are more human tailored more than machine tailored. Like we're going to be able to adapt machines to whatever we need to, but like having sources in a way that are, that's also how the name actually like sort of came about, like calling it Gutenberg and so forth, because sort of tying it to like the history of like how humans have done storytelling, and we're still discovering like tablets of clay today from like proto languages from like thousands of years ago. Or this whole stuff that started this year with I don't know if you've seen the papyrus from Herculanum.
I haven't, no.
It's like a Roman city close to Pompeii that was like buried when the Vesuvius erupted. And in I think the 1700s or so, like when the first like excavation started happening, these scrolls started appearing. And now there's a project to like, because all these like scrolls are carbonized, so it's like impossible to read them. But they've been like scans done like through the 20th centuries and lately over the last few decades. And there's this project about like digitally unraveling them using AI to like actually be able to read and just I think a few months ago there was like a breakthrough where like some stuff could actually be read and so forth. So it's again the way we've stored human knowledge across the ages, like if you lean into language, if you lean into natural language, it has the biggest longevity ever. So even from that perspective, the way we store user content at something as massive as WordPress scale, I think it's worth thinking about what's the best human way of storing this stuff, not in a way that's like primarily machine driven, that might become obscure later on or might become more difficult for a human to just decipher. So again, it's a bit of context to say that I think the more for WordPress, I think there's a responsibility to lean into the human aspects of the technology and to let machines, again, we can create whatever we need to parse, transform, like shape content and so forth for different mediums. Even with AI, it's going to likely become more easy and to the point that it will be trivial to shape some content shape into another shape. So again, the source being something that's human readable, I think it's an important consideration to have.
Cool. That's a good answer. I get quite a lot of people that feel like they're on the outside of the project. So it'd be really interesting to know if you can shed some light on how it actually happens. How does an idea, let's take the like your lead architect. How does an idea go from inception to delivery? And I think a lot of people don't understand the open source nature of actually somebody can pick up an idea and run with it. Like there was somebody came up with is running with the idea of a form block, I think, recently.
Yeah.
And there was some pushback on that. So can you just talk us through that, how that works with you, Matt, the community, from idea to we get something actually in the plugin or into core? That'd be really interesting.
Yeah. That's a very interesting aspect. I think in a sense, So there's been a few already, like I think a few chapters in Gutenberg's history, like the very original ones, like the scope was much narrower. Like I remember before we did the first public demo that we did, like we had stuff like nested blocks and columns and stuff that was not part of the scope. It was just something that was emerging as like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is obvious that we need to support this, but it wasn't initially like part of the scope. Like version 1 of the block editor was not going to have nested blocks. And I got to the point where like, okay, we actually need to build this to convey the idea of, because otherwise it's just like the same text editor with like a different, like it
Was
doesn't communicate things across. But that was something that emerged in the process of feedback loops with users and with sort of like how we
so was this was
how
the
we
scope
communicate.
was the scope quite narrow when your first scoping document? It was quite a narrow scope, was it originally done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was essentially introducing blocks for like the basic text operation, like text, paragraph, quote, images, and so forth. And this dynamic of, again, really making block like the first party entity so that you could, yeah, reorganize, move, like displace things and so forth.
And
That was sort of like more or less the scope.
why was that so narrow, do you think, at that point? Because there was obviously if you looked around
Yes.
the WordPress universe, there were people, all the page builders were out at the time. So
Yeah.
the scope could have been here, but why was it
Yeah.
chosen here to start with the idea that potentially it might go here, or was it just that was actually what the plan was to
Yeah.
start with?
Well, so the overall strategy already was contemplating like blocks as page building and site editing, because
Okay.
again, we had already articulated like the 4 phases. So it was
Yeah.
phase 1 was going to be editing, second one was going to be customization. All of that was sort of like on the horizon, just not in a very like solidified way. But for the editing part specifically, the scope was going to be like not doing this like nested stuff, because that was going to come through like phase 2. Even patterns, like all of that stuff was not really part of phase 1. Like reusable blocks was not part of the scope. Like it was a pretty narrow aspect. The main reason was because the biggest technical challenge was, again, developing this in a way that was compatible with whatever existed. That was the biggest initial challenge, and introduce all the primitives that we needed to, the block APIs to allow for extensibility and so forth. It just came that as these sort of pages started being built and like initial feedback started to roll out, it was like really like evident that we needed to support some of these layers before we got into phase 2. Um, Also, some of them just became like almost they almost built themselves. Like
Yeah.
reusable blocks was something that, okay, now that we have these chunks of stuff, it would be really cool if you can just like take it out and like save it somewhere else and then reference it and update and so forth. So it was very easy to like go from idea to implementation. So back to your question there of
Yeah.
how ideas emerge, I think there's something I really think that ideas are sort of like the easy part of a lot of these things. It's really like the execution and how the ideas connect with each other. That's the challenging part. But that also means I think that most ideas are almost like immediately like if you're looking at the road, like they are sort of there if you look a bit further ahead.
Yeah.
So it's like it's easy to let them come in a sense. So that's when people want to contribute ideas, I think connecting to what's closest to that horizon is generally more effective. It's like than going too far out way where you would need to do a lot of steps even to get to the point where the idea is viable. So that's sort of how I think it's most effective in a project of this size and this complexity and so forth, to
Yeah.
bring ideas into the picture is to connect them, to make like incremental steps as much as possible. Even if you have like a stronger idea that would require like a few steps, to think about like those early steps and figure out how to. The forms ones is because I think Ari was driving that, and we had a conversation at work in Europe. I said like, well, for like something like this, I think it's because there's a lot of form plugins and blog plugins out there, so there has to be a lot of like communication alignment between different entities, and one of the things that I think it's more reasonable to start with is like to look at the what are blogs in core today that already sort of need some of these tools, like especially around like site building. If you look at the common form blocks, like okay, how do you structure those, how you combine them, how do they integrate within JSON? Can we do something there to get started to solidify what are the right primitives, more than jumping into like a collection of form units that are divorced from that. So it's really, I think, about like again, it's not so much the ideas, it's how it connects incrementally to where we are at now.
So how would that work? Just really basics here. So I have an idea. I want to build a form block. What do I? Because people don't know this stuff, so it's interesting when you're on the outside just to hear how the process actually works. So I have an idea. What would I do? How would I interact with the project?
Yeah. Well, I think these days it's really open to just go into the GitHub repository and suggest an idea.
Okay.
And it can be as rudimentary as like, oh, it'd be cool to do this or that, or it can be like a more fleshed out proposal. Again, from like it doesn't go without saying that an idea is going to like receive a lot of attention, or is going to like, there's always like, you always need to nurture an idea and connect, because ultimately it's people building the idea. So like you have to connect with people, like connect it, if you can connect it with problems and use cases, that is super powerful, because whenever there's like a tangible like user need that we can fix and solve, that would naturally attract the interest of contributors, of people that are in the project and so forth. And it's a lot easier to drive through something that has user stories behind them. But it's like, I think it's as simple this day as like going into the GitHub repository and either finding if the idea has already been suggested, or creating or adding a comment or expanding on something. I think a lot of stuff has been connected that way, a lot of features and stuff.
And then do you see? I'm just trying to get a gauge on the sort of hierarchy of decision making. Do you see do you tick every idea that comes actually into production, or you just sort of overseeing things? How does that work?
I try to be as involved in almost every idea that we end up executing and implementing. Again, depends on right now the scale of the project, and the like, even the repository you Google, there's like, I don't know, 5,000 plus issues open. But as we sort of refine like the roadmaps and the proposals, like it sort of draws from that pool of ideas, and that sort of becomes okay, this is the scope for the next release, or for depends on the cycle that we're at, because when we were finishing phase 2, we were looking a bit more to, okay, what are the remaining pieces for phase 2 that we want to establish there, and then that needs to be like segmented into the different release cycles for WordPress as well. But once you go beyond that, it's a bit more like, even right now in phase 3, there's so much surface area that it's a case of advocating for ideas, connecting them to existing roadmaps. We do have if you go to the repository, there are these like umbrella issues that sort of try to give a more hierarchical overview of like, how are we looking at the different areas of the project? And then once you drill into each area, there's also like a breakdown of the elements that are coming into play and so forth.
Where would somebody go to specifically to see those? Where do they go?
Yeah, so if you go to github.com/WordPress/Gutenberg, they should be at the top of the repository as pinned issues. I think one is the like ongoing customization roadmap. There's one for the block API. Those rotate and sort of try to portray what's the current focus for the project. So we're going to need to have like some stuff regarding phase 3 there pretty soon, as that becomes more of a focal point. But that's sort of for new people wanting to come in, that should give like a good insight into how the team is thinking about, how like the contributors are, what's the best place to contribute to ensure that the contributions end up in something meaningful and attended and so forth.
Yeah. So I think people realize they can contribute for one, and it's
oh yeah, absolutely.
That's the amazing thing about it. And in different ways, write a blog post, send it to you, create a YouTube video, whatever. There's different ways of doing it, right? Get influence.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. I've got some specific questions. The biggest question I always get asked about Gutenberg is, why are there no responsive controls in core? So can we address that one? Why are there no responsive controls in core? Go.
Yes. So the main thing why we haven't added these controls is because we wanted to see where these intrinsic design, web design ideas landed into in terms of the platform. And intrinsic web design means that if you take a survey of like screen sizes today, I think there's something like, I don't know, 300 plus different sizes. So it's not conceivable to like if you're using sort of like media queries to like tailor things, like you sort of fall between the gaps of like, oh, this font is slightly bigger, so it got like the tablet design, but it's still a font. Like there's a bunch of like intricacies there that sort of point to the fact that the screen fragmentation and flexibility and the nature of the web is much more flexible than this sort of like imperative targeting of screen sizes. That's what led to this idea of like intrinsic web design is more that each element sort of like describes the way that it wants to display itself. And then containers can also organize things. And so there's a lot of like, there's fluid typography that comes into play there. There's some of the latest CSS tools with like grid layouts where like you can define min max boundaries, so that you can do things like, for example, right now the columns block has this like stack on mobile, which is very rudimentary. Like in something with min max, it would be more like, okay, you say how many max columns you want to show and how many min columns. So that means if you cannot show like 5 columns, but you define that the minimum should be 2, on mobile, you still get 2 columns instead of like this stacked layout. So that's sort of like control where you're essentially saying, defining the boundaries more than saying at this breakpoint, change into this. That's sort of like the idea behind some of these principles.
But those settings aren't currently in Gutenberg. I mean, you can
for columns, we don't have them, but that's one example of like coming back to how you get ideas forward. I think that will be like a nice improvement that is like almost like a small step from where we are.
Yeah.
So it's like there's the chance of that happening is much higher than introducing a whole layer of responsive breakpoints.
That'd be
the
cool.
same. I think.
Sorry. That's being talked about. Is it that adding some more flexibility to like the columns block and the other?
Yes, I suggested this one specifically, like I think about a month ago or so, to be something where how we get a bit more into this space of min max sort of setup and apply it to existing tools, because it is true that right now it's very rudimentary control to say, on mobile the only thing is like it stacks. Like it'd be good to have a bit more control there and make it declarative in a way that you don't need to exactly define the breakpoint. Is mostly based on like how things shift and model and so forth. So I think the other reason why we don't yet have these controls is that it's a good area for the broader community to explore without like committing in core something that we would need to maintain forever. Like if we introduce like these sort of controls, it becomes like an implicit commitment to just support this stuff forever. While a plugin library can explore just adding this layer of controls, explore adding like multiple breakpoints control, figuring out how to connect every piece of the UI to that and so forth. that might lead us to figuring out like, oh, this is the path that core might also be able to embrace. For example, we've discussed if you use the preview devices thing in the header toolbar, that if you switch to mobile, all the changes that you do sort of apply only to mobile or apply only to, because I think the other issue is that it can get very overwhelming if every control has like, I don't know, these three breakdowns of devices, like, and on the sidebar, every control like this, and then the user starts to get in a point where like they don't realize if they apply something to one or the other, like, and it starts to become a bit chaotic. So that's also, again, if we're thinking about what we do in core, and again, this also applies for people contributing, is that we need to think about all the use cases from the end user experience to the developer experience, to builders, to agencies, to enterprise. So something that works for all of these cases or can evolve in complexity naturally based on all of these use cases is really hard. But that's the main challenge for designing in core, is to get these things right. So responsive, I think, is a case where like it heavily optimizes for a builder developer use case, but it's not that intuitive for end users. So I think it's a case where we still need to do some work to figure out what might be the right solution. And it's also, I want to say, it's not saying no to responsive tools. Like I think there's stuff like hide on mobile and things like that, that regardless of the intrinsic web design, like these are like likely needed tools that we would need to add at some point. So the surface area is wide. I think also we started seeing the like container queries become a bit more prevalent so it might be that we go all in on container queries rather than viewport specific queries, and that can be an interesting way to support it, because otherwise you run into situations like you add a pattern, and if that pattern define breakpoints based on viewport, but you're adding the pattern to like a constraint column or like a sidebar or something, like it's just going to not work because it's using viewports, it's using viewport based queries, but you're putting in places where like the width is constrained, and that just doesn't work. So if we want to allow these sort of tools, that's an example of like, if we allow these tools and someone builds a pattern assuming full width for that pattern is being displayed, then when the user adds it in a narrower column, it's not going to react as it needs to. Well, if we apply intrinsic web design principles, if the pattern finds itself constrained, it will know how to lay itself out and so forth. So that's sort of I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I think there are mainly two things. Like one is there's this relatively recent design exploration in the industry that I think we need to embrace to be sort of where things are going, where like the industry is heading and so forth, and leveraging these tools in the best way. And the other one is to make sure that we don't balloon the complexity and the ease of use of these tools if we don't implement them right and diligently and so forth.
Cool. Thank you. I think that's a good answer.
Cool. Thanks.
Because you can't take the stuff away once you've added it. That's the problem. Or you can, but people
that's a big challenge. And I think that's also why some things might seem that they move slower, whereas like in block libraries out there, like you can see like faster movements. And it comes down to that. It's like once we commit with something, we have to be like pretty sure that's the direction we want to go, especially if it's like as wide reaching as adding these controls across all blocks or tying like the experience into that. It's easier when it's like, oh, we want to experiment with a block because it's easier to retire a single block or move it to the block directory. And so that's the surface area is much smaller on that too.
What's your view on block libraries in the sense of, I see a lot of customers' websites where they're using block libraries to design sites they could quite easily do with core, but they just haven't actually, because the information's out there, and there's some reputational stuff around Gutenberg when it first was released, and so it's quite part of my mission is to try and persuade people they can actually create designs with core. And not always, sometimes you might need a block library, but sometimes, a lot of the times, you won't. What's your view on how that's happened?
Yeah. It's there's a lot of things there. I think one is I like block libraries. I think it's a good way to push the envelope and figure out like again, you might say, well, the separator block in core is very like I just want something much more like, and you explore that and you really like nail down into the user experience of it. I think that's a great path. That's how the community evolves, how we learn and how we apply the best ideas back into core. Um, Same with like stuff that you might see, oh, there's an issue in core, but nothing is not really moving on fast enough, like an icon block or something like that. Again, it's a case of like the commitment from core is like too high, but like a block library can explore multiple user experiences around that, and I think that's great. At the same time, I think it is true that especially for layout and containers and so forth, I think core is already like quite capable, and the way that it's going to do these containers is going to be much more integrated with other APIs, like whether it's theme.json or other ways that patterns works and so forth. So leaning into that means that it is going to be more robust going forward for users, I think, to lean on like those basic primitives just being in core. Why that isn't like super widespread or the awareness there, I think again, another issue we have in core, I think there's a lot of like build it and they'll come. Like we haven't like, even if you go to the WordPress.org website, I don't think we're doing the best job at communicating what are the pieces of the block library in core and how can you use them? How does it relate to patterns and so forth? And what can you do? I don't think we've done the best sort of like marketing and branding work around that to really communicate it. So actually like stuff like what you're doing, like the 2024 video, I think is really wonderful. Like being able to communicate like, oh, you can do all of this stuff and this is how you do it and this is the outcome. The more that we can like do that across the community, I think I think that really speaks to users. And sometimes in the core experience, it's not like we don't often have the materials or the space to like really create these showcases. So I think there's a education gap there that, and especially as like again, core will continue to the blocks in core will continue to evolve its tools like the same way that we're, I don't know, adding support for background tools on the group block and like again, all of these containers, we're going to have a grid block as well. Like all of that stuff eventually becomes like, and we need this to be the fundamental building blocks because that's what ensures that all the block themes are inherently compatible with each other, which is one of the main missions or goals of some of these phases, is that I can install a theme and I can swap out the header with a header that I like from another theme, like this sort of compose between themes. Or I really like 2024, but I want to use this template from another block theme. If the layout primitives are the same, it will just work. If themes are coupled with like block libraries for layout containers, it might be a bit trickier to figure out. It's not impossible because again, we have APIs like block transforms and migrations that these different libraries can like create sort of mappings between layout containers from one and the other, so that you can ensure like, oh, if this isn't present, we just like migrate it transparently for the user to this other layout stuff. So there are mechanisms there to ensure that we don't run into incompatibilities. Again, ultimately, it's all just blocks. So as long as these things are built using blocks, there's going to be path to migrate. But yeah, I think you can do a whole ton with default core blocks, and it's only going to get better. And I think I can even see some block libraries extending, like not creating their own blocks for some of these basic units, but extending them in like novel ways, or like, or figuring out, again, even like if you want to add a layer of responsiveness, that could also work across the all the blocks and so forth. So I think like some libraries also will naturally like shift a bit, instead of maintaining their own container blocks, to like extending the ones in core, maybe adding like more like if we have a grid block and maybe doesn't initially support subgrid, maybe there's some explorations that do that. But it's very like the cool thing about blocks, I think, is like these, it's easy to like bring in more and like swap them out and transform them, because the whole system is inherently compatible. So it's not a again, I think it's a far cry, for example, to compare like other page builders that are not running on the block system with block libraries. I think like because like block libraries are all like inherently on the same system. So it's like you can compose them, you can try them, you can even install one to do like one advanced layout on a page where like you run like here, like core blocks were not enough, so I want to try this other one, but you don't need to use it in all the, so you can try, like users can try more things and swap them, which I think is a strength of the system.
I was thinking a bit about Gutenberg being quite unique in terms of it's trying to be a content editor and a page builder. And so I can't think of many other tools actually out there. Like if you look at the page builders, you would never write a post with, well, hopefully you would never write a post with bricks or elements, or you can, but it's a horrible experience. So do you think about it in those terms? And do you think if that was a seesaw, where would you, do you think at the moment it veers more towards a content editor, or is it fairly equal balanced in your mind, those two things?
That's a wonderful question. It's I think that's the biggest challenge we have by far. Like, is we want to create a tool that's the best editing experience, and it's also the best site building experience. I truly believe that it is possible to do that. I think the benefits are huge because the user is learning one thing, and then they can operate in the context that they need to. I would say the line shifts all the time. That's why like every couple of releases we double down on like the writing flow experience and make some improvements. Like again, we are like partial cross block selection like not too long ago, like precisely to revisit some of those primitives, or like adding footnotes and stuff like that. That is technically not part of like the phase 2, which was the primary, but it's like, okay, we still need to nurture the writing experience as much as possible. I think that line, like whenever that line goes too far in one side, I think we need to like correct it and make sure we're not neglecting the other experience. It is okay though to allow like certain contexts to like optimize a bit more for, if you're in site building with list view and so forth, it's okay to like make drag operations more primary, more like the main focus and so forth, compared to when you're writing a blog post. But the boundaries there are much more fuzzy, because if a user like is writing and now they want to add like a pattern section, and it's like, so it's like the boundaries I think are fluid, and if we succeed, we're essentially creating a tool that's that can do both of these things equally well. I think that will be tremendously powerful for users and builders and so forth. I agree that I don't know that there's any tool right now on the web that's really doing both of those things. I think there's like excellent writing editors, and there's like wonderful page builder experiences, but something that tries to really, really do both. I don't think there's that many. Maybe there's nothing at the scale that we're at, which also I think should be a really cool challenge for designers and interaction developers that might want to contribute to something big, even outside the WordPress community. Like we are doing some like really cool stuff here that I don't think anyone else is trying. So like, again, to the topic of like how ideas and stuff, like there are like a lot of like I was discussing with some of the designers about like, I think it was actually based on one of your videos, like
Okay.
that there was this case where like the user was trying to drag from the inserter a logo and place it next to the site title.
It was my daughter. It was my daughter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, that was and that was like really like, oh, this is really frustrating because we have all the tools to make this work.
Yeah.
And this is like again, what she did there is like the most straightforward thing. It's like, I want to put this here, like, and we can make that work. And there's like some very like low hanging fruit there, because I think the biggest issue I think is that you have like a header template part we're not allowing to drop inside, like it's functioning like a solid.
Yeah.
So we need to allow drag to just pass through, and that would just work, because I think it will show like a vertical sibling inserter next to the title because it's already a row. Sorry there. But the other thing is that like dropping on top of the, I think we could do clever stuff, like if you try to drop on top of a block, we show like this sort of we expose the before and after that we have, like for if you go to the ellipsis menu and you click insert before or insert after, that we expose that when you sort of drag onto a block. So
Okay.
if you drag something onto maybe over a block, like it can show like these two sides after like a slight delay or something. Like there's a lot of like small operations that you can try there.
That'd be really cool.
But it's again, I think this is a case of like these feedback loops with users and so forth, and then like having the space to be creative with ideas and solutions. And that can come from anywhere really. Like maybe that's like to the point before, like if someone goes to GitHub and says like, oh, I have this like idea for like how to improve this specific situation with drag and drop, like that'd be great. Like we can discuss, we can like prototype, we can explore solutions. But I really think I feel like we're doing something pretty interesting in the web right now by having like this single editor that can shape itself to account for these different experiences. And I would love like for that to get more visibility as well. I think this goes back to like, it's not just like that we expose core blocks well enough on WordPress.org and people are aware of what they can do. It goes beyond WordPress. Like we're doing stuff that is really cool, interesting, and user friendly, that the web needs to be aware. There's a lot of people that a lot of like these tools that are popping up to do like I don't know, freehand sketching and so forth. There's a lot of talent out there that I think if some of these challenges and the fact that WordPress is trying to build an editor that can do writing and site building equally well, there's an interesting design challenge there, an interesting interaction challenge.
Cool. I've got a few more questions. Going back to my daughter's trying to do a logo. What's your view on, because we've finished phase 2, what's your view on where we are with block themes at the moment? My view is, not that you asked for it, my view is that they're incredibly powerful and we've got all the plumbing in place, but the UI is still a challenge for people. I teach block theme courses now, and you see beginners with it and they struggle. So what's your view on where we're at with it, block themes?
I would generally agree with that. I think it's a similar place that we were at when we sort of finished phase 1. We still had a lot of like room to improve and like fine tune the experience. It was more like, okay, we're feature complete, but the user experience still has a way to go. For block themes, I think we're in a similar place. I think it's you definitely can do almost everything in the editor, like we have the theme design group at Automatic, for example, has been building all the themes directly in the editor for like almost the entire year. I think they built like 60 themes or so just using the editor, which I think is like, to me, that was one.
And 2024 was built in the editor, wasn't it? I think.
Yes. Yeah. 2024 as well. Like that to me was like like a very humbling moment, because again, like I initially started with themes and so forth, and back then, yes, you were like immersed in like PHP templates and design and CSS and a bunch of, and now like seeing designers be able to just use the tool to arrive at what they want to express without having to know, like that's a, I think that's truly transformative. And again, something that we're not talking enough about, like that should be going out to design conferences and telling people like,
For sure.
yeah, like you can design and publish a WordPress theme without having to recruit a development team or do like, for designers, like this should be, which is an audience that I think we gradually lost in the project
Yeah.
compared to like, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, that we can regain by like showing like, oh, you can be self-sufficient in designing these things and showcasing examples like 2024 and so forth. But I do believe that, again, designers and builders are an advanced case. Even like your video about 2024, you arrive at like excellent results, but you know your way around the tool.
Yeah.
So it's like, can an end user arrive at the same results? Even if you were like combining existing patterns and so forth, I think we're not quite there in the experience of even communicating these mental models. Like again, the way that you're picking patterns or exploring patterns, it doesn't really communicate that you can like combine them and build a page by stitching them together. Like, so how can we be better at those fundamental
I mean,
interactions? And
they're the concept, they're conceptually more challenging to communicate to users than clicking on a customizer and choosing some options in a customizer. And
yeah,
that's just the nature of what it is, I think.
yeah, and it starts to work when you get to see sort of like the flexibility, because in the traditional like sort of customizer model where like a theme might have like toggles for showing an intersection or
Yeah.
not, the user shows the intersection but they want it below like a video, like they cannot do, like you become stuck very quickly. So part of the appeal of block themes is just the inherent flexibility. But then, okay, we need to create interaction models that where the flexibility is not doesn't sort of hit you in the face. Like it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like it feels like, yeah, it's super intuitive, and there's ways to do it, right? Because again, you can say like, um, sort of this more linear approach where you're like choosing a header, choosing an intersection, choosing something, and it's more guided. It's more like, and then you can reorder and you can drill into the patterns, and that's why we were exploring some of these zoom out views where
Yeah.
like we want to sort of convey that you're more operating at like section level of the site more than granularly on the blocks, and then you sort of zoom in and do that. But it's yeah, I think that's there's still like a ways to go there. Also in the drag and drop experience is not like, um, again, it works sometimes, it's okay, like, but it's not like it should be like a truly pleasant and straightforward
Do you
experience.
think it's a bigger challenge than it feels like a bigger challenge, the theme challenge, to get that really rocking and rolling to the content editing challenge and from a sort of UI education point of view?
um I would say yes and no. I think yes because like, yeah, it's like the surface area is way bigger, the like
Yeah.
the details and so forth, and the novel interactions are bigger. I would say like no, in the sense that this is what the block editor is built for, is for this combination of blocks and so forth. It's not really built for like the writing experience. So for the writing experience, you need to overcome the challenges of like the, again, like the very first prototype, you couldn't move between paragraphs using the keyboard because each paragraph was its own block and you couldn't like
Yeah.
leave that experience. So in like the very rudimentary implementation of blocks goes against sort of like how you would imagine a text editor to be, like more free flowing. So in that sense, I think like building, like sort of eroding those boundaries and making it feel nice for text editing, I think it is quite challenging in the details. It took some time to get to a point where like you can do like partial selection instead of just multi-selection of blocks. I think for site building, that's sort of like where blocks should be shining. So I think it should be, it might take some time to figure out exactly like all the interactions and so forth. Like especially the models, like I wanted to do for a while this sort of idea where like if you long press on any block, that you sort of lift it up and you can just like repositioning it.
Okay.
Because I think like very few people discover like the drag handle,
Yeah.
and it's also finicky because you're sort of dragging it from a handle and not from the block itself.
Yeah.
So I think there's some stuff there that we can do to, or even play into. We have this selection mode in that's still there from the very early days. If you go to the cursor in the toolbar, it's a drop down where you can, like the idea was that select would be more like, okay, now you're not editing, you're just like moving pieces and so forth. So it becomes more like a puzzle where you can easily drag, reposition, move between columns, all of those areas. I think it shouldn't be that hard to do it. It's more a case of like, yeah, getting the right ideas, getting and then figure out like the right execution for some of these.
Can I ask you about abstraction quickly? Because one of the blocks I think people struggle with the most is the navigation block, and it feels like that was fully abstracted in the past, which was quite a good experience for me personally. And I always use there seems to be a number of different places you can actually edit the navigation block at the moment. What's your view on abstraction and how that plays into blocks and the navigation block in particular, I guess? Would you
so for clarity, what was the abstraction that you found to the one that you were using? Like what?
In what, the navigation block?
Yes.
Well, either when you first go into the site editor and you've got your navigation listed and you can just drag and drop. I always use the list view. I never go into the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the navigation to me. It's like, again, speaking of like, I don't think we'd ever be able to check the box and say we're done with navigation, because I feel like it's going to be it was historically one of the biggest pain points in WordPress. And I think it will continue to be challenging because navigation combines multiple abstraction layers. There's like, how's your site structure? How does it map to objects in your site, mainly pages, but also like these virtual pages that are sort of like augmented templates, like your blog, your archive, your dates. And then it's like, there's like, okay, how it is presented, how it's shown on the website and the front end experience and so forth. So there's a layer of information architecture, of organization of the site, like all of these things. I think it's really challenging to like combine it all. And also people have different mental models or tolerance for abstraction. Like some people, they just want to like deal with a sidebar where they can see the structure represented and they reorder it, and they know that the menu is just going to be a reflection of that. But if you see some users, like they just go to the thing, they go to the menu and they want to select it and they want to add a page there, and it's like, and reorder a few things. Like it's just like they are just seeing their menu is what is shown there. There's a very like strong correlation. So I think we have the right primitives right now. Like that's also why like there's multiple ways that you can edit a navigation. There's another layer which is also like the level of complexity on a simple site. I think navigation and pages is almost like a one-to-one mapping. But if you go to like more complex sites, you start having like, oh, there's a footer navigation, there's the header navigation. You might have top level pages that are not shown on the menu, but you still want access to them through like for direct URLs or whatever. And that already like fractures the experience, because now, okay, your pages model is not a one-to-one to menu. So you start having this other abstraction to deal with. I think we're in a much better place than a couple of years ago with like, okay, how these are surfaced, how these connect to the navigation block and so forth. I think there's still a ways to go there in the details of the experience. For example, right now on the navigation in the sidebar, adding new pages and so forth, the flows there are not like as polished as they could be. But it's like, again, it's a case of like, and also how that ties into the add new page flow, because right now, like you create it and it's there, but how can we tie it to like the model for selecting initial started patterns, like what's the point of the page, how it connects with other templates. So navigation to me is sort of like a kind of like the tip of the iceberg of the entire complexity of a WordPress site. There's stuff that we also haven't like fully solved, which is the convoluted overlap between like front pages, home pages, and the blog home. Like there's sort of like three ways of representing that. They exist for a reason as well, because you might want your blog to be like a sub URL, so the blog functions like a page, so all your permalink structure goes with that. But the way that we present, like users are never going to understand that intuitively. So we need to find ways of guiding and exposing in ways that makes more sense. I think for the navigation block in the canvas itself, I think it's probably right for like some further iterations. There's some work being done on the overlay, for example, like what happens if you collapse the navigation to this hamburger menu or like ellipsis menu or whatever, like, and this overlay, okay, how customizable is this overlay? And there's also like, we want to get into like mega menus. Okay, how are you going to build mega menus?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me about mega menus. So that's in your sites.
Yeah, they can be cool. They can be like a nice and they can be super useful in some sites. But that goes even further in like, okay, what's the data view? How do you manage a mega menu in the sidebar alone? It becomes a lot more tricky because now you have like these drop downs where you might have like images and different like sub like menus, and you might have text there as well to explain what like.
But it feels like a natural fit for a block-based builder to build a mega menu with.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you can like decompose it in like parts and patterns that you can combine and either edit in isolation and then like see how it all builds together. But there's a lot of like pieces there to put together. I think we have it's an area where like even small things can like have tremendous impact. I think one that I'm really interested about is they starting to surface related patterns on the sidebar of template parts and templates so that you can swap things more easily, and you start making this connection of all of those things are like, again, really easy to do in a block-based world. We just need to connect sort of the semantic space, the usability interactions. So that's what I think, even though like, we're like through phase 2 in terms of like feature requirements, I think that's an area where we can still have like a huge impact.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually. We're running out of time, but we finished phase 2, but how much, so in terms of the next phase, how much is going to carry through from the block theme stuff going forward in terms of, you're going to have a pie chart, how much of that? It feels like there's a lot to do still, so.
Yeah, I think it will be like a significant percentage. Again, if I had to quantify how much we were still doing of phase 1 during phase 2. It's hard to tell because it shifted in the time of the year based on like, but at times it was like quite a bit of time we were spending on still phase 1 things, even though I think the fact we have a lot more contributors now, so it's again, even if it's like one team focusing on that is not too much. But I think it's going to shift. I think like right now we're still like spending a lot of time on sort of the tail end of phase 2 and like some of those interactions. Many of the phase 3 stuff also like connects naturally with that, like pattern management, like it leads into the like it's not there. I wouldn't add like a strong boundary line there between, because how we manage patterns also directly informs how patterns are used when you create new pages, and all of these semantic areas are highly related. The nav menu happens on the sidebar, which is sort of like this new admin design. So like it all starts to like the overlaps I think are quite big, that we don't necessarily need to say how much percentage is still on phase 2 versus on phase 3, because a big chunk of phase 3 is workflows, and the workflows are also relevant for like customization and site building and again, we're like style revisions, how all of those mechanics works and are exposed and so forth, still directly inform and shape the like aspects that are intrinsically phase two. I think we haven't done enough as well with on classic themes, like the use of template parts. I think it would be for many users that cannot justify switching from their classic theme to like an entirely new theme, but they might want to use like a template part in a special template and have like, okay, in this small area, I just use blocks in whatever way I want. I think that experience is not it should be, there's a lot of room for improvement in those things, sort of like connecting more elements of the old world. The same with, I think there were a lot of requests for like the style system theme JSON UI to exist for classic themes as well. So there can be something there where like the style book at least is present, like not like the full preview, because if you don't have blocks in your theme, like again, the global styles is really connected with blocks, but the style book is sort of an abstracted representation of that. So perhaps we can bring it in for classic themes and so forth.
Has there been any kind of discussion? I'm really running out of time, sorry. But has there been any discussion around making a nice beginner's interface to theme.json so people could actually do stuff without having to dive into the theme file? Is that happening?
So that's the main goal of the global styles UI, is to be a friendly user interface into theme.json. Right now it's like
I was thinking more about like curating, because theme.json does a number of things. I was thinking of things like curating,
like restricting settings and like absolutely too. Okay. I think there's some interesting exploration from like the enterprise side that are looking a bit more into that. But yeah, to me, like the way I conceptualize like the global styles UI is as an interface for theme.json, and that means like it has to flow from like the most obvious, easy to use, all the way down to like the more granular details. If you want to like restrict the colors that are exposed on like post titles or whatever, like sort of and also as we start looking into one cool thing about theme.json I think we need to do is like, because theme.json are sort of easy to compose, so you can end up with theme.jsons that are attached to like a template part or a pattern. And so you might have I don't know, imagine you have a theme design where like I think actually like one of your versions of 2024 is sort of like that, right? Like a dark sidebar, and then like I think it was the portfolio one. You might want that dark sidebar to have its own theme JSON, where like the default colors is like, because it's inverted, it's light versus dark. So you might have different color options, different sizes and so forth, just for that template part. So that's also, and that needs to be managed in global styles. You're either managing the style globally or you're managing these like sub objects of styles. It's very easy to do mechanically. It's like the UI, how we manage the UI and the user experience in a way that is intuitive. That's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, it feels like we've got this Ferrari with block themes at the moment, but the wheels are sort of just need to put the wheels.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I think I think that also to tie back to the original thing, it's like this kind of stuff, like the kind of stuff that you do and so forth, is immensely helpful to see like okay, what are the clunky parts still, like funneling this user feedback. And videos are they cut through so much stuff, they just directly communicate a lot of this stuff. I was really making notes, for example, for the one with Woo, because like one of the goals with block themes is that you activate Woo and your theme just naturally becomes like a store theme. Like, how can we get there? That's how we like came up with the block hooks API, so that they can do things like display the mini cart in the right navigation block immediately. And then if you don't like it there, you can move it because it's all the same. So it's like, but the plugin can inform that so that your theme feels like it was just built for WooCommerce, even though like you might not have any Woo specific templates in the theme by default.
That would be awesome, because it took a bit of setting up, that one. But it's still, it's the first time I've used the default theme and it kind of looked beautiful. pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Didn't take long.
But if like, yeah, I think like if anything was missing from the video was like those struggle points in the middle, like the time it took, because like it was cool to see from like the final execution and how like, yeah, but it'd be great to like, if you can like write down some of like frustration points and give them to me, I'll run them to the Wood team so that they can like sort those out, because to me the goal should really be like, and it's not just who, it's whatever like plugin that extends like on the education space, like Sensei or LearnDash or whatever, like that if you activate one of these, like between the templates that they bundle, the way they integrate within JSON, how they use block hooks, the blocks they bundle, and how we can have some way of saying what should be like the default patterns for different templates. Like you can like create like a recipe that completely changes just activating a plugin. And that to me is like the beauty of block themes. It's like that sort of composability just comes into vision.
Yeah, it's coming. Right. Got two more questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. I have half an hour more. Yeah.
Cool. Personal question. I've got two questions. What are the two questions? Yeah. So, yeah, personal question. When Gutenberg started getting, it got quite a lot of bad reviews when it was, still reputational stuff out there. How did you personally take that stuff? How was that?
Well, I have a lot more gray hair than I had before Gutenberg. I honestly like I don't want it to be like, to me it was actually really fine to see that people cared, that people had like these strong like feelings about stuff, because it's okay, that means like the project is meaningful. Like I'm not talking just Gutenberg, like WordPress in general, like it's meaningful to many people. And there's a lot of folks where like, and I was either like replying to the forums or like going to work camps and events and so forth and doing like, and sometimes like the strong feelings was just like wanting to express a frustration or wanting to understand why certain decisions were being done a certain way. But sometimes it was like being heard, because and then it's like once you start talking, it's like, oh, like, yeah, everything is fine, and so it's I think it sometimes, I think also the not the anonymity, but like the indirectness of like the web or social media amplifies some of this stuff, where like in person, like it's much more like well, yeah, like, yeah, this part of the experience doesn't work. Like it's kind of crap. Like, oh yeah, but like it's going to be like this. It's going to be better. Like, oh, that's great. Like it's a lot more human to contextualize in that place, and it's hard that's hard to come across in like social media and others. So I think like those things sort of amplify a sense of bluntness and negativity from like that sometimes is not really there once you start digging through. At the same time, I think for example, to me, like doing demos was like a really good exercise in communicating. I think there was a turning point was I think it was 2018 when we did the first live demo in State of the World. There are a lot of like the perceptions like were shifting, and like there was a lot of like support and stuff. I think there's also the fact that a lot of people were like sending messages or emailing that like, oh, now I can do this and I don't feel like shackled to like the tool, like thank you so much. So I think like those things also like it really justifies the effort and the frictions and the it's like, but that often like is not super visible. Like it's usually like and that's always true. Like, yeah, when you have like people are more prone to like give negative reviews than positive reviews as well. So but I think also I think by now like the sentiments have been shifting and people are like really recognizing like, okay, what are the stuff that they can now do that wasn't possible before.
It
and
feels,
and
yeah, it
there's
feels, I mean, I've run a lot of face-to-face courses with
yeah,
beginners in my life. I've never had one that hasn't liked Gutenberg. So I've always been slightly,
nice.
and I have loved Gutenberg. And I was with a client yesterday and they were like, oh, we can do this now. This is amazing. And they were off all afternoon doing stuff. So I've
Yeah,
always been slightly confused by I understand the psychological reasons for it, but actually a lot of the actual reviews, I used to go into the Gutenberg reviews and try and
yeah.
answer questions. But you'd answer the questions and then there'd be silence. People would just shout at you, and then they wouldn't actually. So that confused me psychologically. And I always thought, well, maybe there's something else I'm missing here. Maybe there's how people interact with UIs differs depending on your psychology of what you're like as a person. Maybe you like a certain UI and you're never going to like the Gutenberg
Yeah.
UI.
Yeah, and I think it's also like again, it's at the size that we operate at, like it's the needs of the people, the incentives are all different. It's almost like I mean, at the scale that WordPress it has, it's closer to like being a country where like you have like all these widely different and it's like and it's I think it can also be if it doesn't get into like again like I don't know outrageous insults and stuff like that. Like if as long as it's civil, I think like these disagreements are really like important. I think like these friction points in both ways. I think it is important for people to realize there's a lot of users that are not on WordPress today because it's hard to use,
Mm.
and the web is moving in a direction that like well like if you're not easy to use, you're left behind. And it's also important to see like well there's a lot of people that are like where like the tools that they need to build sites and ensure that their clients are happy are not the same as the ones that you need for like an end user to self-serve and
Mm.
customize the thing themselves. Like all of this is true at the same time, and we need to be able to hold these like seemingly competing thoughts the same way that if you describe like an editor for writing and an editor for site building, like almost any designer will tell you like these are competing thoughts, like these are like different interaction layers. You're going to make something that's a bad combination of the two. But I think that's really the reality of the size that we are in, is that we need to contemplate competing thoughts and
Mm.
find out the ways that it works for both people. And that might mean that's always going to be a balance, because sometimes you need to, I feel like, for example, in the initial steps of phase 2, we had to sort of optimize a bit more for like the theme builder, because if we didn't have theme builders coming in, we wouldn't have block themes, so you wouldn't even be able to experience the tool at all. But that means that like some of the interactions like are not necessarily designed for an end user yet. Like an end user might struggle to like see some of these things, where like a more experienced builder theme designer just like flies through that. So now we need to like also account for that
Mm.
user. And at the same time, like enterprise customers were really like, well, like you're just opening way too much stuff. I want to restrict that down and make sure the brand guidelines are respected and so forth. So we also need to build that. It's true for all of these use cases. Um, same way with extenders. Like if we don't have the like, it was so easy for a plugin in the old age to say, "Oh, I'm just using this front end hook to display like a share button or something." Um, you can do that on block themes, but the expectation is if the user edits the template, they are not going to see that
Mm.
block when they are editing the template, only on the front end. So, okay, we need to design new APIs that account for both things, while also allowing a user, like if they say, "Oh, I really like this plugin with the share button, but I don't want it below my post. I want it on the sidebar." So like being able for the plugin to say, yeah, it's going to show here by default, but you can drag it and move it elsewhere because it's just a block. Like defining all of those layers and interaction points, I think is really where we connect the different use cases, because we connect the user with the builder, with the developer, with the enterprise, with the marketer. And that's really the strength of WordPress. Like it's when we pull those things off. So I think like a lot of the frustrations, like especially when you're building and you're starting to build something from scratch. So in the first month, you're going to be horrible for all of the use cases. So you're going to get all of the negative impressions.
Yeah.
Like eventually once you're like, okay, now the user experience is in a good place, but like this other part of the builder experience is not quite there. So you're going to get like a disproportionate amount of feedback from, so like pushing all of those things, like you cannot just do all of the things at once. So it's like a balancing, like, okay, this is in a decent place. Let's look back to this other thing, raise the bar there. Now, when you look back at the other thing, it's like, okay, we need to like continue to improve like the writing experience or the customization experience in some aspects. But it's an ongoing conversation. I think the one thing that I think we're over now is because before Gutenberg, I felt like core was moving fairly slow. Like it was like the core project, the improvements to the core project. So I think right now the volume of iteration pace and execution pace is way higher. Like we're still doing bi-weekly releases of Gutenberg for the past 5 years. And that's a great opportunity for again, for contributors, for bringing in ideas, for making changes, because there's space now for movements and getting things better. There's more energy and more interest from across the community to like see improvements across the board. Now, like people want to see like, yeah, like the admin, like what's up with the admin or with revisions or with the media library or with like all these areas of the product experience that we can keep advancing. And it's really I think we're at a point where like the compound effects of execution are like showing through a lot more. And 2024 to me is an example of that. It's like there's so much work that unlock the possibility of having something like that, and then be able to like, again, if I go back like 5-6 years, and with a single theme you can do what you did in your video, like you build these like 5 different customer types, and they all look wonderful, and it's like, and it shows it you can all edit it in the same way, and you can like try different style variations for them. And that's like, if we go back, it's like, and if we say like, oh, WordPress is going to have this one day, I think it's like quite remarkable. And it's again, to me, it's a testament to like the tenacity and the like the compound effect of like small contributions and ideas coming together to something like that's really powerful. And it's not an end, it's not, for sure, like it's just another point in the road of a project that has been here for 20 years. There's still plenty to do, but I think like the opportunities now to do it and continue to move fast and so forth are greater than ever.